Imagine hearing a voice in the middle of nowhere when no one else is around, and that voice changes your entire life forever. Not the voice of a human being, not a dream, not a thought, but a direct call from something greater than anything you've ever known. A man named Abram stood alone in a silent desert under a sky full of stars when suddenly the creator of heaven and earth spoke to him. And what God told him was not just a message. It was a command that would destroy his comfort, erase his normal life, and send him into a future he could not see. Leave everything. Leave your country. Leave your family. Leave everything you know and go to a place I will show you. And the most shocking part is this. He didn't even know where he was going. But what he chose next would change history forever. Long ago, in the ancient land of Mesopotamia, there was a powerful and highly developed city called Ur. This city was known for its great wealth, advanced architecture, and busy trade routes that connected different civilizations. People from many regions came here to build businesses, exchange goods, and live in a society that appeared highly organized and successful. The streets were always filled with movement, conversation, and daily activity. But behind all this human achievement, there was a deep spiritual emptiness. The people of Ur had turned away from the true creator of heaven and earth. Instead, they worshipped idols made of stone, wood, and metal, believing these lifeless objects controlled their destiny, protected their homes, and shaped their future. Outwardly, the city looked powerful, but inwardly, it was completely disconnected from truth. In this same city lived a man named Abram. He was not a ruler, not a soldier, and not a wealthy king. He lived a simple and quiet life with his wife Sarai and his family, blending into the same world as everyone else around him. But inside, Abram was different. While others fully accepted idol worship as normal life, Abram carried a quiet but powerful sense that something was missing. Deep in his heart, he felt that there must be only one true God who created everything. He had not yet received a direct revelation, but his spirit was searching, questioning, and open to truth in a world that had lost its way. Everywhere Abram looked, idol worship was a normal part of life. Massive carved statues stood in temples and homes, and people would bow before them with deep religious devotion. They believed these objects controlled rain, harvest, health, and protection. Offerings were placed before them, prayers were spoken to them, and rituals were performed daily. But in reality, these idols were completely powerless. They had no life, no awareness, no ability to hear or respond. The society was deeply religious in appearance, but spiritually blind at its core. Truth had been replaced by tradition, and the living God had been forgotten. But in the unseen realm, beyond what any human could perceive, God was already working. The creator of heaven and earth was preparing a plan that would change the entire course of human history. In a world filled with confusion, false worship, and spiritual darkness, God was about to select one man who would step out of this system and begin a journey of faith. Abram had no idea that his ordinary life was about to be interrupted by an extraordinary divine calling. One day, in the middle of an ordinary moment, everything changed forever. Abram suddenly heard a voice unlike anything he had ever experienced before. It was not a human voice, not a sound of imagination, and not a thought from within himself. It was the voice of God himself, clear, powerful, and filled with absolute authority. And that voice spoke directly to him, calling him by name, Abram. God said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you." This command required complete surrender. Abram was being asked to leave behind everything that defined his identity, his home, his family, his culture, and his sense of security. Even more challenging, God did not reveal the final destination. Abram was being asked to walk forward into complete uncertainty, guided only by trust in God's voice. But God did not only give a command, he also gave a promise. God said, "I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you'll be a blessing to others. And through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. This promise was not limited to Abram's lifetime. It was a generational promise that would extend far beyond him and impact the entire world in ways he could not yet understand. Abram now stood at a deeply emotional and life-changing crossroads. Everything familiar in his life told him to stay where he was, to remain in comfort, safety, and stability. But the voice of God was calling him into an unknown future with no visible proof or guarantee. There was no map, no timeline, and no confirmation from others. Only a divine promise that required total faith. In that defining moment, Abram made a decision that would shape his entire destiny. He chose to trust God's voice above his own understanding. He chose obedience over comfort, faith over fear, and purpose over security. Even without knowing where the journey would lead, he believed that if God was leading him, then the path would ultimately be right and meaningful. Abram gathered everything he owned. He called his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, his servants, and prepared all his possessions for a journey into the unknown. Then he left the only home he had ever known. Behind him remained the city of Ur, his past life, and everything familiar. Ahead of him stretched uncertainty, but also the promise of God that would guide his future. The journey was long, exhausting, and filled with uncertainty. Abram and his family traveled through vast deserts, harsh landscapes, and unfamiliar territories. The sun burned during the day, and the nights were cold and silent. There were no roads, no maps, and no clear directions to follow. Every step forward required complete dependence on God's unseen guidance. It was not just a physical journey, but also a journey of faith and trust. At night, Abram would sit in silence beside a small fire, surrounded by the vastness of the desert. Above him stretched a sky filled with countless stars, shining brighter than anything on earth. In those quiet moments, he would reflect deeply on the promise God had spoken over his life. He had no evidence, no progress, and no visible fulfillment of that promise, yet something inside him continued to hold on to hope. The silence of the desert became the place where faith grew stronger. There were moments when the journey became extremely difficult. Harsh winds, violent sandstorms, and extreme conditions tested their strength and endurance. The caravan would slow down or struggle to move forward, and survival became a daily challenge. Yet despite the hardship, Abram continued forward. Even when conditions were against them, he trusted that every step was still part of a greater plan guided by God. In the quiet nights of the desert, Abram would lift his eyes toward the sky filled with countless stars. Each star reminded him of how vast the universe was and how limited human understanding could be. Yet those stars also became a symbol of hope, reminding him of the promise God had made, that his descendants would one day be as countless as the stars above him. Even though he had no children, he still chose to believe in what God had spoken. After a long and uncertain journey, they finally arrived in the land of Canaan. Unlike the deserts they had crossed, this land had hills, valleys, and open space filled with natural beauty. It felt different from Ur, yet still unfamiliar and uncertain. Abram did not yet understand the purpose of this land, but he knew he had arrived where God had led him. Once again, God appeared to Abram and reaffirmed his promise. God said, "To your descendants I will give this land." This moment confirmed that Canaan was not just a temporary stop, but a key part of God's long-term plan. What Abram was walking through was not random. It was intentional and guided by divine purpose. In response to God's promise, Abram built an altar. This was not just a structure made of stones. It was a physical expression of worship, gratitude, and surrender. It symbolized that Abram was acknowledging God as the source of his direction, his future, and his life. It was a declaration of faith in the promise he had received. There, in the open land of Canaan, Abram worshiped God. Even though nothing around him had changed physically, his heart was fully committed. He worshiped not because everything was fulfilled, but because he trusted the one who made the promise. His worship was based on faith, not sight. But soon after, famine struck the land. The fertile-looking ground became dry and lifeless. Food became scarce, and survival became difficult. The land that once seemed promising now became a place of struggle, forcing Abram to face another challenge in his journey. To survive the famine, Abram traveled to Egypt with his family. Egypt was a powerful and wealthy civilization known for its cities, rivers, and resources. It appeared stable and secure compared to the hardship of Canaan. But this new environment would bring new challenges and decisions that Abram had never faced before. In Egypt, fear entered Abram's heart. He became concerned about his safety and the reaction of powerful rulers around him. In that fear, he made decisions that were not based on trust, but on survival instinct. These decisions led to consequences that added complexity to his journey. After their time in Egypt, Abram returned to Canaan. Despite mistakes and challenges along the way, God's promise had not changed. The journey was still unfolding, and the story was still being written according to divine timing. As time passed, Abram's wealth increased greatly. His livestock multiplied, his servants increased, and his household became larger. What had begun as a journey of uncertainty was now becoming a journey marked by visible blessing and growth. But as their wealth increased, conflict arose between Abram's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen. The land could no longer support both groups together, and tension began to grow between them over resources and space. To prevent further conflict, Abram made a peaceful and humble decision. He allowed Lot to choose any land he desired first. This act of humility led to their separation, each going in different directions to live independently. After Lot left, God spoke again to Abram, reaffirming his promise. God reminded him that everything he could see in every direction would one day belong to his descendants. The promise was still active and growing. God took Abram outside and showed him the night sky filled with countless stars. Then God said, "Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars." This promise was beyond human calculation, stretching far beyond what Abram could imagine. Abram believed God completely, and in that moment his faith was credited to him as righteousness. It was not his actions or achievements that defined him, but his trust in God's word. But years continued to pass. Decades went by, and the promise still had not been fulfilled. Abram and Sarai grew older, and the situation seemed more impossible with time. Yet they continued to wait in faith, holding on to what God had spoken.